She was the best ballet performer in Russia. But in a moment, her life changed forever. Now, she is forced to join a Russian spy school where she must use what she possesses to collect information for the state.
Power. That's what he wants.
The movie begins with two seemingly unrelated characters. One of them is Dominika Egorova, who is a prima ballerina, enjoying a moment of peace while listening to music through her headphones. Simultaneously, we also see Nate Nash, who is a CIA operative and is currently receiving a cryptic phone call. As Nate tries to decipher the coded message, we see Dominika prepare for a performance that will eventually change her life forever. After taking her sick mother to the hospital, Dominika heads to the theater for her scheduled performance that evening. When she arrives on stage, Dominika delivers a breathtaking performance as she captivates the audience, including a wealthy man named Dmitry Ustinov, who was eventually introduced to her by her uncle, Vanya, who is a high-ranking officer in Russian intelligence. Meanwhile, we see that Nate is involved in a tense exchange with a mysterious individual in the streets of Moscow. As the deal goes down, the sudden arrival of the police at the scene forces Nate to create a distraction to allow his contact to escape. Nate barely makes it back to the American embassy with his cover blown, and his superiors furious at him. Back at the theater, while Dominika performs, her dreams are shattered as a fellow dancer deliberately injures her and ends her ballet career. With her future now in ruins, Dominika is left devastated in the hospital. Months later, she eventually learns from her uncle that her benefits, including her mother's medical care, will be cut off by the government. In her frustration, Dominika also finds out that her former dance partner had intentionally injured her and is now in a relationship with another girl. So, Dominika confronts the two one evening and unleashes her fury on them. However, she immediately starts to feel some guilt, and she eventually calls for help for the two. With no options left for her, Dominika turns to her uncle for help. That was when he offered her a way out, but it comes at a price. Vanya proposes that Dominika seduces Dmitry Ustinov, the man she had met at the event the night of her injury. He was a powerful man with dangerous ties, but the Russian intelligence wanted him dead. Reluctantly, Dominika agrees and meets Dmitry in a hotel, where things quickly go out of control when they enter their room. Dmitry was obsessed with Dominika, but when he tries to force himself on her, a masked man suddenly appears and kills Dmitry. This left Dominika in total shock, and we are introduced to the masked man, who is also a Russian operative named Machurin. After he secured Dominika, Vanya arrives to inform her that with the way things have turned out, she now faces two choices. One is to be killed because of what she has seen, and the second was for her to be enrolled in a brutal training program for Russia's elite spies, known as Sparrows. She was left with no other choice, and she eventually agrees to join the Sparrow school. Before she leaves, her mother warns her to be wary of Vanya, who she suspects has always harbored unsettling feelings for her daughter. In the end, Dominika arrives at the school where she eventually finds out that it is a place where manipulation, seduction, and psychological warfare are the tools of the trade. Dominika's life at the Sparrow school is terrible. The day she arrived, the matron of the school, who is a strict enforcer, makes it clear that Dominika is expected to use her body and mind as weapons. But despite having no military background, Dominika excels in the school as she proves to be a quick learner and a formidable opponent for every obstacle. However, the training is ruthless as it is designed to strip away her humanity and turn her into a cold, calculating spy. Meanwhile, in the United States, we see that Nate is trying to deal with the fallout from his previous mission. When his superiors suspend him indefinitely, he warns them that his asset in Russia, who is a high-level Russian informant, only trusts him, and he reminds them that it'd be hard for them to replace him with anyone else. In the end, Nate is eventually deployed to Hungary, where he attempts to re-establish contact with his assets. In the meantime, back in Russia, Dominika faces her first real test as a male cadet attempts to assault her in the bath. However, Dominika turns the table on him as she uses her environment to defend herself. When the news got to the matron, she made plans to humiliate her in front of others as she instructed Dominika to strip off her clothes and allow the male cadet to do whatever he wanted with her. However, Dominika turned the table on the male and took control of the cadet's dominating disposure. She eventually proved that he only wanted power over her when he couldn't perform any action with her. This incident catches the attention of General Korchnoi, watching via the CCTV, and eventually starts to see potential in Dominika. She is soon given her first mission, which was to travel to Budapest, get close to Nate, whom they believe is the American spy, and uncover the identity of the mole within the Russian intelligence. When she arrives in Budapest, Dominika moves into an apartment with another Sparrow, Marta, who warns her that the only way to survive in the real world is to find leverage over those controlling her. In the end, Dominika wastes no time and begins her mission of shadowing Nate as she registers at the same pool where he usually swims. Their first encounter is a tense one, and Nate quickly realizes that Dominika is not who she portrays herself to be. However, despite the clear danger, Nate is intrigued by her, and as the two try to figure each other's motives out, Dominika begins to manipulate those around her, including her superior, Valentov, to her own advantage. When Valentov eventually attempts to pressure Dominika into sleeping with him, she cleverly manipulates the scenario to appear like he was attempting to assault her, thereby using the situation to blackmail him, and ensuring that he reports positively on her progress. But despite all her manipulations, Dominika finds herself continuously drawn to Nate, and their interactions soon grow more intimate. But trust is something neither of them could afford at the moment. When Nate starts to sense how vulnerable she has become to her own people, he starts suggesting to her to defect and work for the CIA instead. With these options before her, Dominika starts to feel torn between her duty and her growing feelings for Nate. However, she eventually agrees to take a lie detector test for the CIA, which she passes without issues. Soon, tensions begin to rise and Dominika informs the CIA that she has set up a meeting with Boucher, a U.S. chief of staff who is willing to sell nuclear launch codes to the Russians. The CIA eventually turned the meeting into a ruse, with Dominika swapping the real codes for the fake ones which were supplied by the CIA. After the exchange, Boucher realizes that she has been set up, and before she could respond, it was too late. She dies when she is hit by a truck while she was trying to escape. The Russians, who are now aware of the double cross, immediately summons Dominika and Valentov back to Moscow for questioning. When Nate hears about this, he tries to rescue Dominika at the airport before she leaves, but she signals him to abort the mission, as she knows that running away would only confirm her betrayal. When they arrive in Moscow, Dominika and Valentov are tortured for information. Eventually, Valentov is killed, but Dominika manages to convince her superiors that she is still loyal to them. With her life very much hanging by a thread, Dominika asks for permission to return to Nate, as she tries to convince them that she is now more valuable to Russia as a double agent. When she returns to Budapest, Dominika and Nate get back together, but their time is cut short when Macharin, the Russian operative who killed Dmitry, shows up at their apartment. A brutal fight ensues, with Dominika and Nate barely surviving his brutal attacks. In the end, Dominika manages to kill Macharin and calls the American embassy for help. Days later, as Dominika recovers in the hospital, General Korchnoi visits her, as he finally reveals himself to be the mole Nate has been protecting all along. Korchnoi confessed that he is disappointed with the corruption in Russia. Then he offers Dominika a choice for her to either betray him and return to her old life, or continue her work with the Americans. However, Dominika quickly capitalizes on the opportunity and decides to turn the tables once more. In the end, she made an arrangement with the Russians as they agreed on a deal with Americans to exchange Dominika for the mole. Then in a stunning final twist, we see that Dominika had framed her uncle Vanya as the mole, using the evidence she has been quietly gathering from him as proof. However, Vanya is quickly taken out at the airport by the Russians because they couldn't bear seeing such a top agent with the Americans. Towards the end of the movie, Dominika is hailed as a hero in Russia for exposing the mole. However, the final scenes reveal that Dominika has successfully infiltrated the highest levels of Russian intelligence and has eventually become a CIA informant. And that's the story of the movie, Red Sparrow. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us what you think about the movie. Until next time, stay safe.